Hi, I'm Rick Biella, the artistic director for the San Antonio Chamber Choir, and we're pleased to have again with us Jake Runstead and Todd Boss. And they are going to be with us on the first weekend of May for the musical world of Jake Runstead. And we are most pleased to present several, what I would consider major works of Jake's and Todd's, not the least of which is a work that I heard first in 2019 ACDA convention. And myself and probably 2,000 other directors immediately stood to recognize the genius of this work and the power of the text and everything together in making that a most prominent work in Jake's powerful unit of music. But before we begin with anything about the music, I would love to have Todd. I was taken with your broadcast when you said rhymes. You make rhymes less suspicious.
I'm a rhyming fool. I love the sounds of words, and I love it when rhymes gong in a way that make an idea resonate where it might not have without that sound. And I'm kind of addicted to the noise, the funky janky noise of the language, and how sometimes we stumble on rhymes, you know seemingly surprise, when they come as a surprise. And I'm particularly drawn to them because, as you said, I talk a lot about this. Rhyme is really a suspect activity because we get so used to it as children. It's sort of sing-songy, it's sort of cute. When we go to the Hallmark card aisle and we pick out a card, there's this little, goofy rhyme, and it we know after a while that it is disingenuous, that it's just sort of built to sound pretty, but it may lack intentionality or deeper meaning. So what I love to do is bury those rhymes in sort of secret places where even I, on reading it over and over and over again, am surprised again and again at the placement of the rhymes, so
Mhm.
that they can still do their dangerous work, but they don't come in expected places. And
Uh,
it's particularly useful when working with Jake because he's suspicious of rhyme too, right? Because
uh,
It's one of the most common things I tell the time. Like, Todd, come on, a little less rhyme here.
oh, that's funny.
because he's right, it cheapens a piece of music too, right? It can cheapen a piece of music too. But so we do this nice push and pull around rhyming sounds.
Well, could you read us our Silence Haunts Me?
Yeah, the whole thing. This is an adaptation of Beethoven's letter to his brothers confessing to the loss of his hearing, and it was never delivered. I've read somewhere that he was buried with it, or he was found dead with it on his person. I'm not sure if that's entirely true, but it was never sent. And um, it was written originally in German. There is an English translation that I borrowed from because I don't speak German. But I took a lot of liberties with it. So it's not a translation. I call it an adaptation. And I took a lot of liberties around uh, the order of his thoughts and the elaboration of his thoughts. And I added some imagery and a lot of different components that just build out on what I imagine he must have been going through. And the original is full of a lot of emotion. He was going through a lot. He was thinking about the end of his life, taking his life. He was confessing to a disability that was central to his personal world, his livelihood, and his greatest joy, and an infirmity that he was battling. He wrote it in Heiligenstadt, which is a spa town where he thought, and doctors thought, he might recover, but of course there was no recovering. So it's a really sad a letter, but it's full of a lot of courage as well. A silence haunts me. Hear me, brothers. I've a confession painful to make. 6 years I have endured a curse that deepens every day. They say that soon I'll cease to hear the very music of my soul. What ought to be the sense most perfect in me fails me, shames me, taunts me. A silence haunts me. They ask me, do you hear the shepherd singing far off soft? They ask me, do you hear a distant fluting, dancing joyously aloft? No. I think so. No. I think so. No. God, am I Prometheus, exiled in chains for gifting humankind my fire? Take my feeling, take my sight, take my wings mid-flight, but let me hear the searing roar of air before I score the ground. Why? Silence is God's reply, and so I beg me take my life. When lo, I hear a grace and feel a ringing in me after all. So now as leaves of autumn fall, I make my mark and sign my name and turn again to touch my flame of music to the world, a broken man, as best I can. As ever, yours faithfully, a bell, a bell. Hear me and be well.
Oh, um, yeah. I am taken not only with your reading and the words, but also the conjugation to the music that almost is poetically. It's almost as if you would say it when I read your or when we sing your piece. It's almost as if you would speak it, and the sustained speech is experienced as again, I just say a very visceral kind of event. Nothing feels phony in either the words that you wrote, Todd, or the way that you translated that into the musical form. Um, I'm taken with the fugue in the middle of the work as being sort of a juncture point that sets the work aflame, if you will, and then pulls out of it. Any comments about that, Jake, in terms of the way this transforms?
So when I conceived of this piece, first I was in the Music Museum in Vienna back in 2017 or something like that, and I saw this letter, a copy of this letter, and after reading it, knew, wow, that would be an amazing piece to write someday. And I knew that I wanted to utilize some of Beethoven's music and thread it throughout the piece. So when I got this commission from ACDA for the Brock Commission, um, I this piece came back to me as a possibility. So I started doing more and more research on Beethoven and listening, of course, to his music and revisiting a lot of pieces. And also when I read that about a year before he wrote the letter, he finished his ballet Creatures of Prometheus. And knowing that story and knowing that when an artist is tackling a story like this, they're attempting to place themselves into that character. And so was Beethoven thinking of himself like Prometheus, where he's gifted humanity this beautiful gift of his music, but he was punished by the gods with his deafness. And so I presented this all to Todd, and we were both kind of giddy about it. We knew that this was something going to be really special. So as far as that middle section about Prometheus, and wanting to use Beethoven's music, I took the fugue from a funeral march in the Third Symphony, and it just happened that the words fit perfectly. Like, we didn't really plan it that way, but it
Wow.
just worked out, and so it was pretty special that all came together.
Yeah, really, really quite profound. The aspects of thinking about the solo voice as a soloist, but you do it differently than most composers that I know. I mean, the entire choir is singing perhaps the most profound line in the poem. Why? Why? That dramatically stated tenuous nature of the silence that's felt around the words as well, even when you just spoke them as well, and then also musically the same kind of thing. Can you talk about that? How that why that works for you? I think a lot of other composers try. I don't think as successfully sometimes.
Um, so when conceiving of a piece, I'm not just thinking about sound, but I'm thinking about what's the experience of that piece, being an audience member sitting in a space and having this piece, essentially come through the air to you, but also the visual aspect. And then what is it like to sing it as a performer and share that piece in that space with an audience? And so with that comes all of the parameters that are necessary to think about in that capacity. But knowing that unison voices is a really powerful tool as a composer to use. And I love using it. I think there are many moments where it's just exactly what we need. And so in this moment where the choir essentially it's like a recitative or a dramatic monologue where they're just saying these words, why, why? Silence is God's reply. And I wanted it to be simple. It didn't need harmony. It didn't need accompaniment. It's just the voices in kind of a sung spoken mixture. But also I have very specific directions in the score about how to achieve a sound. So I don't want it to feel full voiced, but I want the voice to tremble and to feel uncertain, to feel almost defeated, to feel desperate, all in that moment. And that's what Todd wrote into the poem. It's all in there. So it's a matter of me pulling out the music from the poem or from the text,
Just
drama
for
from the text.
those that don't know this work, I think even the first line goes down to a low D below middle C, and you're asking all of the women to join in with the men's sound. So this very, what I'd call cradle of civilization kind of sound occurs for the choir, and then to the extreme for the men to try to, like, really with despair, almost try to sing those upper notes as well, comes through in the writing
Mm.
and in the poetry, I think, dramatically. I'm taking with so much of this. Do you How many drafts do each of you do of a poem or of the song? I mean, I'm imagining that, like a song like this, you must have had different sections that you're thinking about, but I'm just interested in that composite ability to pull it all together finally, and how many, what does it take?
I'll start because I wrote the text, right?
Yeah.
That came first. Jake contacted me. I think I was in London, and I went to bed that night and woke up in the middle of the night with the line, "A silence is coming for me." That was what I originally had in my head. A silence is
Wow.
coming. And I wrote it down, and in the morning, I think I might have texted that to Jake, that I was going to be writing on that a little bit. And on the plane ride to the United States the next day or a day later, I really was writing like crazy, and it kind of overtook me. I had this bodily anxiety reaction to the writing of it. I was sort of trembling in my seat on the plane, and I was like that for hours on the plane ride across the Atlantic. And when I got back, I stayed with Jake in Minneapolis. So we had a good, intense 4 or 5 days after that of writing together, really on the text. He would read what I had, comment on it. We'd think it through, we'd chat about it, and then I'd go away and write some more and bring him back another draft. I went through 12 drafts of the text during that
Wow.
period. And when I was done, it was interesting because the handoff, well, I'll let Jake talk to the handoff.
What's that? What,
You remember how I was sort of embodying it, and I was really,
yeah. Right. We go through these different stages. So because the text comes first, so initially we have the idea, or I have the idea and bring it to Todd, and then we both kind of hash through it and throw around possibilities for what it might be, what direction it might go, themes, arcs, things like that. And then Todd goes to work and works through all of the aspects of the emotional world of the details of it, and really has this deep, profound experience, and then gives it to me. And I haven't yet had that, where I've gone through that, just the arduous process of doing the work, and so then once I take those words and then begin my creative process and then grapple with the complexity of it, then I have my turn. And then I say to Todd, like, oh my God. Like, and then he's like, I know, right? Yeah. So it's like this weird distance between our own emotional creative experiences with the piece until the premiere, when we can then both experience it, because it hasn't lived, right? Like I can play through it on the piano for him or sing through it, but it's not the same as hearing it performed live by the choir, the finished product. So both of us don't experience it in the same way until we hear it, at the premiere or at the first rehearsal. And so it's a really fascinating experience to know that, yeah, Todd has something and then I have something, and then we both don't. It's this weird, it doesn't exist, right, until we finally hear it come to life in the voices.
Yeah. And then after that, do you have more drafts that go on? Are you making revisions when you're hearing for instance, the Capital University premiered this, I know. Did you go to Capital University and then make several transformations in the score after the fact?
So it was actually really fortunate. I was actually at Capital University working with their wind ensemble for a piece they commissioned. And so I happened to be there while I was writing this piece. And this, I never get to do this, but I got to bring in some drafts and workshop some parts of the piece with the choir while I was there, which was amazing. And then I would send some things to Todd, and he would listen and say, like, I remember there was one part in particular, it was near the end of the music to the world, a broken man as best I can. And I remember that initially there were kind of separated sections, and Todd said, can you attach a broken man to that previous section so it feels like one single thought or connected? And so I was able to do that. And that never gets to happen. So it was a really wonderful experience to be able to do that.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I mean, I'm not a composer, but I am an arranger of sorts. And all of the arranging I've just done so many revisions after I present it to the choir, because it was almost always by need. My community choir needed a piece that they could actually sing that that worked for that particular group. Yeah. So that is such a blessing.
Oh, I was just going to mention a bell, which you had asked earlier, Rick, about whether or not we ever come to, we never came to blows about this, not by a long shot. But one of the more contentious moments in this piece was that last bell. He thinks he hears a bell, a bell, a bell. And that really threw Jake. It was something that he worked hard to get rid of, and I don't blame him. I don't blame him because it kind of it interrupts the goodbye of the poem, and it comes at a moment where we've really resigned the speaker has really resigned himself to his fate. And it just sort of comes out of nowhere. I get that. I get all that. Um, I clung to it almost for reasons that I couldn't articulate. So it was really difficult for me to argue for the inclusion of it. I just knew that uh, I I just knew that there was something ethereal in that notion that he should, in the very end, even cling to the idea that he was hearing something.
I'm
That
so
I
glad you did. That is a magnificent moment. I think you're right on for both of you to keep that into the
You know,
piece.
and what was so interesting is I wasn't happy with it until the final rehearsal before the performance, the night before the performance.
Oh,
And it
geez.
was because I just had this idea in that final performance where we needed a physical gesture in order to make it work.
Mm,
Right? There are certain things that happen that an actor can do, but that a whole choir can't necessarily do. They can't inflect the same way a single actor can. And this moment is very much like forever or as ever, faithfully yours. He's signing off on the letter, and then he has this he thinks he hears a bell in the distance, and it necessitates this kind of, do I hear something? And so in that final rehearsal, it just clicked, and I said, okay, we need to try this. We need the whole choir, to
mm.
say as, and gradually lower their heads, as ever, faithfully, as if they're kind of looking down the page and signing off, faithfully yours, a bell, a bell, looking through the window of his apartment, in Heiligenstadt, and looking at the bell tower and seeing if the bell is moving that he thought that he heard, and then ultimately sees nothing, and then signs off on the letter. But it required that physical gesture of actually flipping heads up as if we're seeing something that I think it needed in order to work. So I
And
was
then
very
and then
thrilled when it finally happened.
and then the big surprise at the end, which we will not share with this, you'll have to experience in the performance, is something to behold in terms of that transformation of the poetry disappearing and
Yeah,
etc.
it really was a a study in drama for choir. How do we make a choir be dramatic? How do we bring in a little bit more of the theater into choral music? That's really what
Absolutely.
this piece is about. And so I find that, I think because choral music largely stems, at least our tradition in the US, stems out of a church tradition. So it's a little bit more staid and conservative, but choral music is in a different place now, where it's concert music, not only, but largely that's what's happening in the US. And so it's now on par with theater and with opera and orchestral music. And so we can utilize drama. We can utilize these other aspects instead of just kind of a staid in the background art form. And so I'm really interested in how we can bring that to our works. And so Silence Haunts Me was kind of really our first major study in that concept.